Right, let's crack on. Welcome everybody to today's High Street Conversation, 16th of October. We're going to be talking about building community engagement. And there is a lot for us to discuss on this topic. So we are fresh from the Big Cities Conference in Manchester, where 170 people joined us to talk about a number of big issues when it comes to building a global city. And we were really lucky to be joined by the leader of Manchester City Council, Councillor Bev Craig, who um, supposedly she wasn't on her top form, but I kid you not, she was amazing. She was excellent. And if that's her operating at just 50%, then, God help the rest of us. One of the things we discussed, which I thought is really pertinent to today's discussion, is how forward thinking and innovative Manchester was in introducing lots of new residential into the city centre. By the turn of the century, it was really cracking on with residential development. And it was different then, it was innovative then, but now it feels like it's the norm. Whenever there is empty space, empty property in a town centre today, it feels like partly because of a housing crisis and partly because of a lack of demand for commercial space, that how we conceptualize new housing coming into a town centre is almost the norm, whether it's upper floors, whether it's even ground floors, however it's done. It feels like that a key pillar of today's town centre regeneration is to introduce much more residential. Now, this announced a few weeks ago, pertinent to those in Scotland, is Scotland has been talking, specific cities have been looking at the challenges they have around residential, and the Scottish government has decided to act in terms of planning policy. So they are looking at new permitted development rights that are now allow for new homes to come into town and city centres, replacing commercial property. So that consultation is ongoing right now, and that is certainly something we'll discuss with ATCM Scotland. And this follows a similar change in England over a decade ago when England looked to open up first office space specifically to conversion into residential, and then more recently look at other uses such as retail and restaurants, and allowing property owners to use permitted development to change those to residential. And of course, that has a huge impact in terms of the makeup of our town centres, because we're not talking about largely commercial destinations anymore. We're talking about a bigger mix. And one of the knock-on impacts of that is a lot of the place management industry is having to start to think about the growing co-location of these different users. We're not just talking about employees, employers, visitors, shoppers anymore. We're also talking about residents and community. Now, it might have been that community was always an important aspect, but the way we view community now is changing because some of those stakeholders live in the patches we are managing. And this is not just about a UK and Ireland phenomenon either. We're seeing this globally. Some of you might remember, those who were there, that for the 2024 Place Management Conference in London, one of the case studies we had where residential was a thing, and the bid and other place managers were having to think about how they look after residents in that particular commercial centre. That was Lower Manhattan. And if Lower Manhattan is seeing residents come into the area, then you can bet it's happening everywhere. And because of this and other reasons, community engagement really matters for the place management industry. So it's something we do really need to get our heads around in terms of how community fits into the bigger picture. This is something which is being tackled by the UK government at the moment, or it's at least making an attempt to tackle it. So the UK government believes it can restore trust in politics and political institutions by actually investing them by actually investing in communities and giving them more control than what they have at the moment. The new Secretary of State for Housing, Steve Reed, has actually drawn the link in the new Pride in Place strategy document between austerity, deindustrialization, that lack of trust, a rise in extremism, and links it all to a lack of control for those communities. So Pride in Place is looking at how it can address issues around control. It goes on to talk about the link between strong social capital and improved socio-economic outcomes, crime, health, education, well-being, for example. And it also looks at that link between social infrastructure and deprivation, concluding that the places with the weakest social infrastructure also have the highest levels of deprivation. And where there is poor quality shared spaces, such as in our public realm and on high streets, then there is a failure to allow for good community building and community cohesion, which the document points to some of the challenges we have around a real polarization at the moment. So the Pride in Place strategy looks to try and address some of the challenges around social infrastructure, address it through a number of issues, including, of course, funding. So the Pride in Place strategy is actually quite broad, and a lot of it, some of the most important bits, we're not going to get into now. But what we will talk about specifically are those bits related to community, and obviously the centre of the Pride in Place strategy, which is the Pride in Place programme. So that Pride in Place programme, I think a few of you who have been lucky enough to get the funding will already know basically how this program works because we have seen it already. And in fact, the Pride in Place program is just a reiteration of what we've seen before. So on the 1st of October in 2023, the Conservative government of the day announced the long-term plan for towns, where 55 towns were selected across the UK to get £20 million each, and the spending of that £20 million would take place over the course of 10 years. So you were looking at roughly £2 million being spent on various projects per year. And that was mainly focused around town centres. So it was a lot of things related to town centre activity that that money would be spent on. Fast forward to new government, we weren't sure whether the long-term plan for towns, because it was announced so late in the reign of the Conservatives, whether the new Labour government would continue with that programme. And what we found in March is that it would be retained, but it would look slightly different, rebranded, restructured, and there was also an expansion as well. And I can't for the life of me remember if that expansion took place under the Labour government or had taken place under the Conservative government. But 55 towns became 75 towns. And the long-term plan for towns became the plan for neighbourhoods. And no longer was the money necessarily specifically about town centres, but what it could be spent on is now much broader. So anything to do with a neighbourhood. And rather than the decisions being led by a town board, it would now be led by a neighbourhood board. Local authorities have to play a facilitation role, but it is the neighbourhood board that makes the decisions. These neighbourhood boards cannot be chaired by local authorities. So fast forward again, and we get to the Pride in Place programme, which is now the next iteration of the plan for neighbourhoods. Again, another expansion. So we have an extra 169 places which join the initial 75. Again, 20 million over the next 10 years for all of those places. This time, the funding is specifically for England, Scotland, and Wales. So I don't quite understand the mechanics of this, but previously, the long term plan for towns included towns in Northern Ireland. Um, what the government is saying is that the funding for the next tranche of places is for towns in England, Scotland, and Wales. However, equivalent money will be made available for the Northern Ireland Executive to decide to spend however it wants to spend it, for a related programme. The types of areas that have been chosen are slightly different. So we're talking about slightly smaller areas, areas with a population of approximately 10,000. And they've been chosen based on metrics around deprivation. Are they doubly disadvantaged? So the areas with the highest levels of deprivation and the weakest social infrastructure. And that money will go into improving that social infrastructure. So I will say that although it is now broader than just town centres itself, in truth, because we are talking about funding in social infrastructure in that shared space, a lot of that will be your local centre, district centre, high street, whatever. So I still think there is a strong overlap there. Alongside that, we'll sit the Pride in Place Impact Fund, where 95 locations will get 150 million altogether. So that's approximately 1.5 million each over the next 2 years for immediate investment in high streets and shared spaces. So I still need to find out a little bit of information about how that's going to work and where's been selected to get that money. Um, so that's the Pride in Place program. And then there are other bits in the Pride in Place broader strategy as well. There's lots of information in there about protecting local assets. I think some of it is only being reiterated in the Pride in Place strategy. Some of it has already appeared in the devolution bill. A lot of it applicable just to England rather than broader UK. Some of it applicable to England and Wales. So I'll try and make the distinction where I can. So specifically for England, we have community right to buy. The views of the government are it's not been very effective, it's not been very useful, so they're looking to expand it and they're looking to give community groups first refusal on purchasing local assets which have been registered when they go up for sale. And also ensuring that those assets remain on sale for a longer period of time to give those community groups the ability to raise the funds they need to complete a purchase. So that's coming forward in the devolution bill. There's also going to be funding for the protection of cultural and heritage assets through things called the Creative Foundations Fund, the Heritage Renewal Fund, and the Heritage at Risk Capital Fund as well. Again, for England, there is the question of neighbourhood governance and what that will look like. So the government is asking the UK government is asking local government to think about what effective neighbourhood governance looks like. And I have had a number of members, especially in city councils, talk about what type of governance should be in place for smaller towns where maybe there isn't the capacity to have a bid model, for example. So this is certainly something that should consider for those of you working for a city council that is looking after a number of neighbourhoods and smaller district areas, what that might look like, especially as we go through local government reorganisation and we move to more unitaries, so we lose those district councils. We probably need to think about how this would work. There's stuff in the Pride in Place strategy about volunteers. So for England, the government is looking to work with local communities and organisations to co-produce policy priorities enabling volunteering and social action. And for those of you who were involved in our session with Linen Quarter in Belfast and the way they've used volunteers, it certainly seems like it can be a really, really useful tool for getting stuff done in town centres. There's also stuff in there around business use and ownership as well. So there is going to be a consultation this year to explore town centre uses with the aim of increasing flexibility. So we'll be watching out for that. Obviously, a similar consultation ongoing at the moment in Scotland. There will also be the streamlining of the compulsory purchase process and land compensation rules. So there's quite a bit in there. So I want to ask the question, what tools are we as a place management industry using to engage communities? So for today's conversation, we'll ask about the bid model and how much that can embrace communities. I want to hear from local authorities as well in terms of what you're doing. I want to hear about how we are using digital tools to engage with communities and any other bits of community engagement as well. And also, if people want to talk about the Pride in Place program and Pride in Place strategy, how it's working in their areas, we're going to open up to that as well with a Q&A at the end. So that's everything from me. I want to start off by introducing Lee Walker at Ipswich Bid. And Ipswich Bid, some of you might remember working with Power to Change, was part of the Community Improvement District pilot. And we've had a presentation on this before at the World Towns Leadership Summit. And I have to say, I was really impressed with some of the ambition at Ipswich Bid around using the SID model. So it'd be really good to get an update. So, Lee, over to you.
Thanks, OJ. Hi, everyone. Some of you are familiar faces, some of you are not. I've got some slides, OJ, if you want me to put them up. I don't know.
Yeah, go for it. So you got the share button at the bottom, big green button with the arrow pointing up.
Yeah, I should be able to spot that, shouldn't I?
All right, while you're doing that, Gillian, can I just bring you in on your comment and question, actually, while we've got a few seconds, because I think that is an important one to note.
Yeah, sure. I suppose my comment is really from Northern Ireland, folks, for those who don't know me. We're not included in Pride of Place, but I've just finished submitted response to the consultation for the Department of Communities, and it's looking at shaping sustainable places is the title of that programme. Very similar in nature to the Pride in Place, similar amounts of money being bandied about, i.e. 10 million over a certain number of years per council area. Principles are still the same and the objectives are still the same, and again being very much led via community engagement. We've been very lucky in the town that I normally work with, Coleraine, where we've got the 20 million and we spent the last 10 months doing community engagement, very, very extensive. So I'm interested to hear those who have done it in a digital way, because we've done most of ours face-to-face community consultations, and also pump priming our community groups with some event funding that they can base their engagement around. So we pump prime the engagement and then do the consultation at those engagement events. So, and I see Ipswich is ready to go. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of what's happening in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, it does, Gillian, and I think that's a really important point, and especially in terms of the use of digital to support that engagement as well. And it's one of the, I think there's positives and negatives, I think, to the way Pride in Place and the long-term plan for towns has been structured, which probably is the reason why that engagement piece with communities becomes really important. So we'll have a broader discussion on that after we've heard from Ipswich. So it looks like Lee, I think you're ready to go.
I think we're there now, aren't we? Hopefully.
Yeah, cool. I think you just need to go to present, I think it is.
The idea.
Perfect. Yeah,
I never
perfect.
dreamed of getting to an age where technology had got past me, so it's slightly depressing to realise that someone's had to talk me through the buttons. There we go. So OJ, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about Ipswich Central and community improvement districts and how and why we're doing things here. I'll start with a bit of context and then I'll go through what we're actually delivering and how the community improvement district element of that fits into why we hope to think we're doing things a bit differently. So Ipswich Central is obviously the business improvement district for Ipswich as a town. It was established in 2007. You know how many bids are in the industry, and has a levy figure of around 600,000. It's been through 4 different ballots, and in each of those, it's got a really, really strong result and mandate from its business community. But where we've been interested is actually how you can use that strong mandate from what is realistically a relatively small, even small part of the business community. We only charge a levy to 407 businesses. There's the best part of 1,000 businesses even within the area. So the majority of businesses within the area don't actually pay a levy. Also, one of the other things about the business community that we're trying to serve is actually there's definitely always been a perception that a town centre bid is principally there for its retail and leisure businesses, and that's the most visible part of what we do. But if you actually look at even just the members that we serve, over 60% of those are professional and office sector. And so one of the first communities we have to think about engaging with in anything that we do are the staff of those businesses, because actually they are part of that community. And when we go and talk to those businesses, it's very much less about the return on investment into their tills and very much more about how their staff can feel part of a place and part of a community and how the town can serve them. So a number of the things that we do are actually about that more than they are putting money directly into the till. And for the business, that means that they don't necessarily have a member of staff that wants to relocate from their office in Ipswich to Cambridge or some of the more affluent areas around us. That actually saves them a percentage of money, but it means that Ipswich has an audience coming in more 3 and 4 days a week now than the 1 or 2 it was 5 years ago to use the high street as a place for them. Part of serving the community also means that whilst we're business led and business funded, we've worked really hard to reconstitute a board that actually represents the wider community as well. So we've stopped short of having residents on the board, but what we have done is go way beyond having a board that's just constituted of our levy paying members. So our chair sits in a business that's actually outside of a levy paying business in the town centre. And whilst we have some of the major employers on there, we also have small freelance creatives, we have education, we have hospitality, we have media. We really try and build a board that actually comes at it from a perspective that's wider, more diverse, and more representative of Ipswich as a place than simply just the levy payer base that we build. We've got a small team. There's only 2 of us, 3 of us, 4 of us, sorry, 2 in the marketing, and then me running it and a finance department. And then alongside that, we've got a street security presence. But it's a small team trying to deliver. And the reason we bring that up and talk about it is because actually, if there was a temptation for us to think we could do all things and be all things as part of this, I think we'd fail or we would achieve less. So actually, we see our role as being part of a much wider team that is working for Ipswich. And that means working consistently with the local authority. It means working with and amplifying individual businesses. It also means working with and engaging with a number of community groups. So a number of the projects we're going to talk to you about, actually, they are delivered by the community. And that has some benefits directly to us in terms of not having to be the funding of everything, but it also means they're bought in and they are delivered for and by and from Ipswich. So the way we do that in Ipswich is that we have a fairly unique approach to maximising spend on delivery. We actually have a consultancy division within the organisation that goes out and does work around the country, and we try and sell that as a real positive in Ipswich. So actually, once we hit our target for our consultancy work next year, 100% of the money our members put in will be able to go directly on delivery into Ipswich. And actually, we don't think anywhere else has managed to do that. So we want to build an organisation here where we go out and raise income to cover our core costs so that the money our businesses pay in can be spent on the community of Ipswich. And then delivery, we've got back into, and I think this is one of the first core points that I want to make, being about and serving the wider community and delivering that vision shouldn't get in the way of remembering your core objective in the first place. And you earn the right to do the bigger stuff and work with the community by having a core focus in your day about doing your job and doing the delivery. So we have 4 core strands. They're not revolutionary in any sense, and I'm unashamedly proud of that. But what we do is focus on raising standards, building campaigns and events, doing more marketing and promotion, and then representing and supporting. But the way you can amplify them is to see us as a part of a wider thing. So there's none of these campaigns that we now deliver that don't think about the broader impact on Ipswich and how you can turn an ambition to make Ipswich a regenerated town with a vision that focuses on how you have people living in it into reality and delivered through tactics. In security and standards, we employ My Local Bobby. I'm sure a number of places employ a security service like this, but that leads to directly 60 to 70 deters of shoplifting a month, £100,000 of deterrence over the year, and £22,000 of stock recovered, facilitating 4 direct arrests a year. But the basic reality of doing that is we're not able to do that without working with our partners. So in addition to this service, we actually managed to secure from the local authority the ability for these individuals, our security service, to enforce the town's public space protection order. That only works because we've built that relationship and that trust. And actually that means that we free up our police colleagues to be able to focus on some of the more serious and organised crime elements around this. Our greening projects, one of the feedbacks we had in the last 18 months was that actually the place felt grey at times, and we wanted to make it feel greener and more alive. But actually, we're not the experts in that. There are a number of community groups that work within the town that have a real passion and a desire to see more greening in the place. Now, we facilitated that by purchasing some of those hanging baskets, for example, and some new planters. But it's a collaboration with a project called Greener Ipswich, facilitated through our local authority as well. So all 3 partners play the roles in this that we think are of most value. So we provide some of the initial funding and do some of the bulk purchasing, means it doesn't have to go through the state's procurement process, and we can get that moving quickly. The Borough Council agrees to do the consistent watering of those, so you're not relying on volunteers to do that. But actually our Greener Ipswich volunteers pick the locations, engage with the community to find where the best places for those to go was, and then to supplement that on top by actually planting up the planters themselves. And the result of this is that it's not just something that feels imposed onto Ipswich and picked by us. The planters have gone into locations that the community looks and feels like they are theirs and they belong to them. In our events and campaigns then, our primary focus is to bring people and spend into our town, but we balance that by understanding that Ipswich isn't one of the richest towns in the UK. It's got some real areas of deprivation, and that for the place to look and feel real, it has to engage with the communities that still use it. And actually, we spend a lot of time talking about how do you bring in high net worth or high spend individuals into our places. Actually, the data we've got on footfall shows that we've got a core audience that comes in, and it does come from some of those more socially deprived areas. Actually, if we can work with our partners on projects that helps raise their aspiration and attainment, we're working to an audience that already sees and feels Ipswich is for them. And in some ways, that may be easier to do than simply go after a customer base that doesn't see Ipswich as being for them. I think one of the things you can also do to actually cement your position as understanding your place is find which assets of your place look and feel like they are unique to your town. For Ipswich, for anyone that knows it or doesn't, it's an absolute one town football club. And for a long while, the club had felt detached from the town, but it is by a mile the biggest brand the town has and an asset to talk more widely. But we wanted to use their moment of going to the Premier League a year ago to showcase everything the town had and made sure that all of it wasn't just focused directly on the club itself. So we actually worked with the football fan organisations and then produced some photography that showcased Ipswich in a different light, that actually said, this is the real Ipswich, these are the businesses that are here, and this is how they engage with the club. And actually by tying into that feeling of Ipswich as a community, we were able to do stuff like get a picture of our local vicar holding a flare on top of the vicarage, which Copper 90 picked up. And whilst that sounds like a one-off image, it actually got us out to an audience of over 2 million people. So it's thinking differently about how your community assets can really showcase the true value of the place. A Very Suffolk Christmas was another example of how we integrate community into everything that we do. Geographically, we're surrounded by some very nice towns with some very traditional Christmas offers. If I was being directly candid, we don't and can't compete with those Christmas offers on a like-for-like basis of saying our Christmas is like Bury St Edmunds or ours is like Cambridge. So what we tried to integrate was a feeling of Ipswich is the county town of Suffolk, and how do you make that feel like it's true rather than a statement that's just held for 100 years. So instead of having a collection of sleighs for the Christmas market that we put on, we had a collection of tractors and we decorated them in a Christmas theme. And then we supplemented that with a number of reasons. And actually, it became the busiest day of that Christmas period because, again, we were building stuff that the community wanted and the community wanted to look and feel like it was part of it. We have a disproportionate Christmas offer, and rather than that simply be something that we do ourselves, we worked with all of our cultural organisations to allow them to launch that as one core offer across the town. So that meant whether you wanted to see a dance show or a traditional panto, whether you wanted an art gallery or a musical, there was something for you. But it's only possible because we build that community and work with that community of creative organisations to showcase everything that they've got. Sips, which was about understanding the town's heritage and brewing, and again, talking in language that's about actually the town centre is a place that welcomes on a very tactical level. We came across a problem that a lot of our pubs were dog friendly, no one realised that they were. So by simply understanding that we had an audience that sat on the edge of the town that felt like the town centre wasn't for them because they couldn't bring their pets in, and I am of that generation where we didn't have children during COVID, we got dogs instead. Like it actually made it start to feel like a place that was for them again. And the tangible results of that was 5,000 people completed this trail. That was 50 to 100,000 pounds of additional spend into the pubs. But more importantly, it gave a whole audience of people a feeling like the town was for them. Fortnight again was about celebrating the diversity of the food offer. Again, thinking about what does the community of Ipswich want? It's inauthentic to say that we've got a load of really high-end restaurants. We have some, but actually it's got a broad diversity of food. And again, cementing in everything that we deliver, this feeling of what feels like Ipswich is a community for and of the people that both live in it and use it. The Brighton the Corners Music Festival is about showcasing the best talent that we have and bringing together some of those music venues. But again, we collected the programme this year, worked with our businesses in the area and found the gaps of what people were unsure of. So we were able to give them an experience that meant they came for a full weekend. And then actually understanding what people's critiques of us as a community is and was. And one of those was that the routes into Ipswich gave people from the estates a feeling like Ipswich town centre wasn't for them. And so while we've got the long-term vision and we've spoke about and have started to talk about connecting our waterfront with the town centre, this is one of those quick interventions that we were able to do. Slight anecdote for all of us that have to deliver this on a day-to-day basis. I got a quote to do this in paint and it was £70,000. And we actually managed to adopt the technology that Louis Vuitton used for wrapping their shop as a handbag and got the cost down to £6,000. So it's about finding those tactical interventions that mean you can do stuff of a scale that might be otherwise unattainable. And whilst we have a long-term strategy and we work with our partners to bring some of these old buildings out of use, the community wants to see action now. And this is one of those first actions to make that place look and feel welcoming. Again, more music events. But this was the real big event where we brought the community together. And this is where actually OJ and I started the conversation about me coming today, was around most towns of a small size, once a decade, will have a big event that's disproportionate. And as a place, we're never that geared up for it because unlike, say, a Liverpool or a Manchester, you don't have the infrastructure to deal with it every day. And at 8 weeks' notice, we found out that Ed Sheeran was doing some homecoming gigs. Now, in an ordinary sense, we could have laid back, all our plans were set. We could have just said, it's great, it'll come, it'll bring people, and just let it happen. But we didn't think that was the right approach. We wanted to make it feel like a homecoming party for probably the biggest celebrity that Ipswich has. And that was only possible by the community stepping up alongside it. What that turns into is, rather than the footfall simply going to the football ground and going away again, or it feeling like people were coming from away and the community weren't able to be part of this moment of its current most famous son coming home, we just basically committed to turning the entire town pink. And actually, that meant from simple posters to residents putting stuff in windows to, I was going to say banners hanging off bridges, but that comes with connotations now, flags on lampposts, doesn't it? But it's just the whole place of building a community spirit. So from Willis, our most famous Grade 1 listed building, lit itself up pink, first time they've ever done anything like that, to a window dressing competition, to people actually coming out and meeting it. The 200,000 additional people that came to Ipswich, we know came to the town centre, not just to the ground, because we've got the footfall data to prove it. And so it's one of those things about if you embrace these moments and you build a community around it, you can leverage them to mean tangible benefits for your actual residents and your community, as well as the businesses. I think, again, one of the things we've done by focusing on community and its importance is it's turning into real interventions now. So because we do stuff beyond the traditional norm, we were commissioned by both the borough and county council to work on this space. Again, because we can carry the trust of a number of organisations. I should have put a before picture in here, but this was an absolutely dilapidated. The phone box you see at the back had no door, it had been graffitied. The buoy hadn't been painted in since it was dropped there. The pavement was dirty. And this project, because of the way we were able to act and procure stuff, cost us a total of £40,000, and yet has totally transformed a route in. And so where I'm sure we spoke previously about this vision of building a community and turning the town into something as a blueprint, it's really pleasing for me to see that come forward as action and to get partners doing the bits that they are most suited to doing. This is some figures there. I've managed to put that slide in the wrong place, which is excellent on my part. But the digital footprint that we managed to achieve through the Ed Sheeran thing and through connecting outside, we actually got him to collaborate on a number of posts with us, and that meant we were able to showcase Ipswich as a town that was transforming to our local audience and to his global audience of 50 million people. We were only able to do that again because the whole community got behind it and put its best foot forwards. And then that turns into, hopefully, through these series of actions, through completing stuff that actually is about delivering what our residents and our visitors want, and actually starting from a point of view of thinking about it as that, not necessarily as directly income coming in for a bid. Footfall's up 6.5% this year in the first 6 months, and we're seeing a return of those customers with a higher spending power. And I think that is because all of us are now taking actions that are dominated by and led by what the community wants to see for the town. We're not stopping there. There's more to come. Christmas will be again rooted in that what feels right and looks right for Ipswich. We do stuff like we put the actual Christmas tree on for the town. I'm sure a number of you do. Actually, when I came in, I was pretty sure that wasn't going to be something that made a difference. But our community tells us, as resident and as visitor and as business, that they still want that feeling. And so we do that stuff for them. Building on that history, we've turned some local events that different community groups did a small beer festival over 2 days. We've managed to get them to expand that to be a week. And so again, giving our community moments to come in and see the town and feel as theirs, and building that spirit of music into a winter festival. That all, though, is about us being brave enough and honest enough to say, yes, we think we're a good bid, we think we deliver some good projects, but that can only be done by working in collaboration with our partners and being brave enough to let each other take the lead in specific areas and take the credit in specific areas, because ultimately what we're here to do is improve the town. And rather than have any of that friction, we've built really strong relationships. So a number of those projects on the screen I haven't even spoken about because they weren't delivered principally by us. And we let our partners take that credit, but all of it adds to that cumulative picture of Ipswich as a place. So I think I've tried to today go from the conceptual idea of community at the heart of what we deliver as placemakers into how that starts to come into tangible action and change in a location. And that, in me, has a few core takeaways. One is we're always thinking about what our community actually wants. And we start that from an annual survey of residents and visitors, as well as simply of our businesses. So we look to seek and talk to different audiences, and then to build that in, to understand that actually our day job is to get on and do the delivery, but that we can't do that on our own or in isolation, and that we have to work with our partners in the local authority, and we have to work with the community groups that sit alongside us, because ultimately everyone therefore benefits from it. And yeah, we have the usual structures for representation, but we also, like I said, go beyond that and build in a substantial number of opportunities for our actual residents and visitors to engage directly with us and look beyond the simple 407 members that we serve. We have a specific group for our independent businesses as well. So even though the majority don't pay a levy in, we don't treat them any differently. And that some places may feel controversial, but again, when we serve a number of big major employers and they want the best possible town for their staff, we can't do that by being some sort of exclusive membership organisation that doesn't deal with businesses that don't pay. It's about taking that holistic approach that means everyone benefits overall. And then, of course, we give the major employers their own voice. That's about them serving their own community, and we facilitate that as the bid, but they speak as their own voice. So when we have major infrastructure issues, actually their weight as the people that employ 7,000 people in the town are responsible for near enough £1 billion of GDP. That speaks more loudly, if we're really honest, than me standing up there and doing it. So we find the right messages for the right audiences to ensure as a cumulative community, we're putting pressure on in the right places. And then that goes down as far as revamping our bar watch and making sure that actually they feel they're heard as well. That means that our engagement figures consistently remain strong, and we still do the basics. That's one of my other key takeaways is you earn the right to go further and do more and be part of the community and deliver by doing your role as part of that. And I think there's a danger sometimes when we get into the big vision and strategic bits that we lose sight of actually you earn the right to be part of that conversation by continuing to deliver strong, tangible tactical results. So I've tried to hopefully take it on today and show how this vision for a community is actually now being delivered, and we are seeing results of more people coming. I'll hopefully got time to take any questions that you might have, but yeah, just thank you for taking the time to listen to me and to see the showcase and the case study of what Ipswich is doing right now.
Yeah, Lee, that's really, really good body of work there. That's really impressive. And I think in all the sort of conversations and controversy around the term community improvement districts and how we conceptualize them and bring them forward, and the questions about governance, it feels like you've sensibly sidestepped all of that by not making it necessarily about governance and having members of the community dictate how levy payers' money is going to be spent, but you've nicely brought together some great working with the community stuff for the community that at the same time supports the town centre as well. And some really good work there. And I think there will be a point in time when we'll probably bring you back to discuss the work you did around Ed Sheeran specifically, because certainly there's a lot of our members that have asked what benefits do some of the sort of big gigs, concerts really have for different elements of the community, because some of these superstars, they're in and then they're out again. And I just think some of the work you did around Ed Sheeran was fabulous.
I think it's one of those things where, that's why I'm a supporter of the bid model, actually, because we were able to be reactive very quickly, because 6 weeks out, the local authority was struggling to pivot for this big thing that was coming. But actually, we managed, I think that total campaign cost us £12,000, and about a third of that was on bunting. But if you actually amplify the spend each of the businesses did to transform their own businesses, it transformed it. And I think there's a real risk if we hadn't have captured the moment, it would have just simply been people go to the train station, go to the ground, go to the fan park and come back. So our big learning from it has been, if you don't do something to sort of use that moment, you won't see the spend come into the place, because the consumer's got no incentive to do it. But it doesn't have to be something expensive. It can probably just be something that feels authentic.
Yeah, fabulous. Everybody, questions and comments for Lee in the chat box. And what I want to do next is I want to move on to digital engagement. So, Barry, can I bring you in?
Yeah, thanks, OJ. Will I share my screen?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. I'm gonna just reduce this and just let me know. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, can see it. I'll let you know once it's gone to presentation mode. There it is. Perfect. All yours.
Great. Thanks, Emil. And well done, Lee. Very, very good presentation. Very interesting. So first of all, thanks for having me on and thanks for taking the time. And it's good to see everyone. My name is Barry Conlon. I'm the co-founder of Lukiva. We provide, we're a technology company. We provide a software called a Digital Town Hub, which really has at its heart community engagement. So it's a really good topic for me to be speaking on. So thanks again. So just to start, I'm going to be talking, obviously, because we're technology, I just want to focus on the technology side of community engagement. And what I want to go through is community engagement for place management, what the strengths and weaknesses are for social media, the evolution of technology platforms over the years, and what other options there are, and then a couple of very quick case studies at the end. So at the start, I just want to put into context, set the scene a little bit for what we're trying to get out of community engagement. It's all the obvious stuff. It's the stuff that Lee talked about in Ipswich's case, which is building trust and partnerships and transparency and, you know, creating an identity for the place and getting all these engagement metrics and everything that contributes towards a really strong community. So that's the focus for our technology. So how are we currently using, as a society, how are we using technology? And I'm going to focus on social media in particular, being Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. And I'll start with why are we using it? And the obvious answer is the user base, right? So X has 561 million monthly active users. TikTok has 1.59 billion monthly active users. Instagram has 2 to 3 billion, and Facebook is the real winner. It's got over 3 billion. They've just within the last 12 months gone over 3 billion. Interestingly, Instagram and Facebook are the two that have gone up over the last 12 months, and X and TikTok have actually gone down. So Facebook's back. So if we have a look at the motivations behind why we are using these platforms. So we have access to a large, diverse audience. As we've just seen, we can have dialogue and debate. Our data is secure and available to us. We can engage with our thousands of followers. We can buy and sell via social media. And of course, the best reason of all is that it's free. So these are our motivations, and we're going to have a look at those in a little bit more detail. There was an article on the Power to Change website that I really liked, and it was by Rachel Caldicott. It was talking about the government's digital social policy, and one of the phrases that she used really jumped out at me, and I think it's one of the reasons that we value social media. She said, modern community empowerment and social infrastructure building starts in Facebook groups, Signal and WhatsApp groups, Discord and Slack communities that fill the gap left by community centres, coffee mornings, and jumble sales. And I think that's completely fair and true, and it's probably an undersold benefit of social media that we don't give it enough credit for. That's where all of these social movements are starting. Just to have a look at some other examples, all of these platforms, Movember, Macmillan, Earth Hour, Small Business Saturdays, WhatsApp groups to feed lockdown Britain, Scotland Loves Local and Love Your Local Market. There's loads more examples, but all of these platforms, there's no way they would have had the reach, and there's no way they would have had the success that they've had without social media. So this is why we're using it, and these big movements are definitely benefiting. But what I want to look at is how effective is it really at community engagement, in particular the engagement side of things. So I want to dig into that in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to start with Facebook. I'm going to pick the biggest of them, so we can't look at all of them together. And I want to look at the organic reach since 2012. I'm going to start, obviously, what organic reach means for anyone who's not familiar is if you post something on Facebook, just a comment or a story or an event or something, how many people are going to see that just under normal circumstances? So back in 2012, that number was 16%, which, is a fairly respectable open rate for any newsletter or anything like that, for anyone who's got that. It went down slightly in 2014, and then in 2016 it plummeted. And 2016 is a big year for Facebook. So what they claimed they were doing is they were tweaking their algorithm, which was supposed to focus on meaningful interactions. That was their words. But really, in reality, what it did is it prioritized kind of sensationalism and emotion over genuine connection. And it made it much harder to reach your audience. So that was the big change in 2016. There's other things happened, which we'll go through as well. So that continued to go down in 2018. It popped up a little bit in 2020, which is probably an anomaly related to COVID. And then it continued to go down in 2022, down to 2024, 1.37%. And the most recent stat for 2025 is actually 1.2%. So, just to state the obvious, what that means is that if you have 1,000 followers on Facebook and you do a post, then 12 of them are going to see that. So it's not particularly satisfactory result. So that's led to a lot of talk that organic reach is dead. So everyone is really scrambling to kind of work out how to adjust to the algorithm. How can I actually get some interaction? And what it has meant is that it's had an effect on people's sales. So a lot of publishers, a lot of brands in general are using social media to make sales, and that's had a big impact on them. Luckily, Facebook has a solution for this, which I think we all know what it is that it wants us to pay. So they've got ads. And if we have a look at the numbers around ads, so the current average cost per click is just under £1, and the cost for 1,000 impressions is £8.90. So if you sort of extend that out, and this is subject to the business itself, but you might expect a small business to spend about somewhere between £1,000 and £3,000 per month if it wants to reach the audience that has signed up to be a follower of that business. A stat that really jumped out for me is that Meta relies on ads for 97% of its $164.5 billion revenue in 2024, which is just a phenomenal number, which makes you question whether you can even still call it a social media platform in the first place. Is it an advertising platform or is it social media? So back in 2016, like I said, Facebook changed a few things. One of the things that they did is they introduced Marketplace, and they launched it with a view to taking on Craigslist and eBay to capture all of these user-generated sales. And it's been a phenomenal success, as we're not surprised. They have 4 times the customers of Amazon. They have over 1 billion monthly active users on Facebook Marketplace alone. It doesn't do the revenue that Amazon does, because Amazon is much more business focused, and Facebook Marketplace is much more user-generated sales focused, but it's really taken a huge chunk. But it's riddled with fraud. So this is a report from 2023 by TSB, which suggested that 34% of the listings were scams, and it's all the tactics used by the fraudsters. So over £1 million a week being lost to fraud in the UK alone. And stats in the US suggest that about 56% of rental listings in 2024 in the US and the entire country were fraudulent. So it's got definitely issues, got things we have to be aware of in that sense. The next thing I want to look at is who actually owns the data. So firstly, your photos and videos, who owns that? Well, you do, that's your copyright. But you grant Facebook a license to use your photos and videos, and they can use them wherever they see fit and for whatever purpose they see fit. In terms of your posts and messages, same concept, they are your copyright, but you grant Facebook a license to use those posts and messages wherever they want to. Your followers' contact details, so who owns them? That's Facebook. So that's your followers' email addresses, their phone numbers, their addresses, etc. Not yours, that's Facebook's. The engagement data, that's likes, clicks, shares for your followers, and that's theirs. Behavioral data, that's what your followers' pages are, what pages they're clicking on, what content they're viewing, what ads they're seeing and responding to. Again, that belongs to Facebook. And device and data location, that is, not surprisingly, that belongs to Facebook. What you get as a user, or as a city or town or bid or whatever, is that you get access to some anonymized analytics. So it's not nothing, It's valuable in and of itself, but it's a lot less than what we would like to have, of course. So taking all that into account, I want to go back to our original motivation. So why are we using social media for community engagement again? So we have access to a large, diverse audience. Well, you know, we have to put a question mark over that. So do we really? We can have dialogue and debate. Well, again, not if people can't find our content. We can't. Our data is secure and available to us. You know, there's a question mark about this whole sentence. You know, is it even our data? Is it secure? Is it available to us? You know, most of the time, probably not. We can engage with our thousands of followers. It's more accurate to say we can engage with 1.2% of our thousands of followers. We can buy and sell via our social media, yes, provided we're aware that it is absolutely full of fraud and it's free. Well, not really, as we've just established. It's very much reliant on people paying to get any kind of a reach. So there's a term for what has happened to social media over the last 10 years, and the term is enshittification. Apologies for the slightly fruitiness of the language. But this is the title of a book that's just been released in October by Cory Doctorow, and the subheading of the book is Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. So enshittification has been twice word of the year with the Macquarie Dictionary and American Dialect Society. It's got its own Facebook, so it's got its own Wikipedia page, which is very interesting. And the Financial Times has suggested that enshittification is coming for absolutely everything. And once we go through what it is, you'll start to see it absolutely everywhere. So it applies to social media. It also applies to all of these other platforms. That's why we're going to line them up. And we're going to have a look at exactly what it is. So here is the natural history of enshittification. So first, platforms are good to their users. So think Facebook 2004 to 2010. You know, you saw your friends' posts and their comments and their pictures. It was really good. It provided a lot of value. That's why users flocked to it. The next step is that they abuse their users to make things better for their business customers. So think Facebook 2010 to 2016, when you started to see more ads and kind of thought, well, geez, I haven't even seen any of my friends' comments or posts or pictures for a while. It started to become a little bit more, a less satisfactory user experience anyway. And the last step is that these platforms abuse those customers to claw back all the value for themselves. And that's what happened in 2016 with Facebook. You'll start to see, they prioritize ad revenue. They prioritize their own financial results over everything else. And they become a giant pile of shit. And that's what's happened or is in the process of happening with all of these platforms. So we talk about Facebook, but it's happening elsewhere, right? So a couple of quick examples with Instagram in 2023, image posts reached an average of 14,800 users. The following year, this dropped to 5,200 users, which is a 64% drop year on year. Deliveroo is, all of the food delivery platforms are just as guilty. So initially, when they were building their business, they charge restaurants 10 to 20% per order. These days, it can be as high as 40% because they now have a critical mass. So they're starting on stage 3. They are abusing their customers, their business customers. And Amazon, who is the king of enshittification. So once you add all their fees together, an Amazon seller is being charged 45 to 51 pence on every pound. And almost even worse is that on average, the first result in an Amazon search is 29% more expensive than the best match for your search. So not only is it not serving its business customers, it's not really even serving its users in any way. It's just got its priorities all wrong. There was an interesting article on Medium in July, which I really liked. And what the author described it as is, he said he's renting his audience. So if you don't own the audience, then you're renting it. And he described it as building your brand solely on social media is a lot like decorating someone else's apartment, which really resonated with me. Social platforms, they own the rules, they own the distribution, and they own the relationship between you and your audience. So that's what we face, and that's why 1.2% is what we're talking about in terms of organic reach. So there must be a better way. How is it that in 2025, we're at the mercy of these social media platforms that are almost refusing to connect us with the people. They're refusing to allow this engagement of people who have actually signed up to hear our content and to engage with us. So what would sustainable community engagement look like? Well, first and foremost, there should be powerful engagement tools. It should promote economic growth, social cohesion, and civic pride. That's essential. All of our place data should be owned by the place manager. So all of our email addresses, all of our followers' contact details, their preferences, their interests, all of this stuff that's currently owned by social media, that should be the property of the place manager. We need a delivery mechanism, so that's technology, but there shouldn't be barriers, there shouldn't be hidden costs. It should be used just to connect local people. We should have our own local e-commerce marketplace. We shouldn't be allowing all of this money to leak out of our local economies, and the sole purpose of it should be to connect buyers with sellers, not all of these other priorities that we find elsewhere. And the last part is we need to connect our digital infrastructure with our physical infrastructure. And that's what that's why we need to connect IoT in the public realm. So we need to bring all this data from screens into our hub. We need to send data out to screens. We need to understand the complete picture, our footfall, our air pollution, etc., of our towns, to really understand what's going on. And that's what a digital town hub is. That's what we've built. You know, an engagement for all of these different stakeholders, being the place manager, the businesses, the residents, the tourists, the students, the workers, whatever. We want to put everything local all in one place, so everyone is there and everyone is engaging. So just a quick look at a couple of case studies. So these are some of our platforms around the UK, and what you'll see is, you know, digital town hubs are in places large and small, and, you know, coastal and urban, and all sorts of different challenges. And each customer has its own motivation for launching. I just want to look at three of them really quickly. So in terms of Love Newmarket, they launched last month. And what they wanted to do, they're supported. So, you know, a great example of a partnership here. They're supported by the Newmarket locality team, and their goal is to improve health and well-being outcomes for the population. So they want to target specific people. They want to be able to communicate and signpost the mental health and wellness support. And, you know, Newmarket launched this just after their ballot. So it's a great new incentive to get people excited about the new bid term. So that's their motivation. The next one is Barrow. So Barrow have a very different issue. They have problems that I'm sure lots of places would love to have. They have huge amount of new employment opportunities. So they've 6,000 new jobs coming. They've 15,000 new university places in the next 15 years. And so they launched their digital town hub last year. And really what they're trying to do is they're trying to big focus on engineering, because it's BAE Systems is providing all of these new employment opportunities. So what they want to do is they want to make sure all of the people who come to Barrow to work, well, they want to put down roots, they want to stay there, they want to find all the stuff there is to do for their family, they want to feel welcome, and they want to provide a bit of a legacy beyond these jobs. How can we create the town and build something that lasts? And so they've chosen Digital Town Hub to help with that. And the last one then is Blackpool. So again, different problems to elsewhere. They launched their Digital Town Hub in 2024. And their challenge is what to do when tourists aren't around to support the local businesses. So they have 20 million visitors, over 20 million visitors every year, but they're not spread out evenly over 12 months. Of course, they all come during the summer months. And this is the problem any sort of tourist-based destination will have. So how do they make the residents feel relevant during the off-season? How do they promote off-season businesses, keep the businesses going when the tourists aren't there? So all of these issues they have. And so again, their channel of choice was Digital Town Hub, and it's going very well. So all of these examples, and in fact, all of our installs, they still use social media. So what we're not saying is that social media is useless or there isn't a place for it. But if we look at what the biggest brands in the UK are using social media for, not exclusively, but they do use social media quite a lot, it's to get people onto their own platform, because they don't want these obstacles. They don't want these barriers. They don't want the algorithm to get in the way of their communication. So everyone from, Nike to Starbucks to Cartier and IKEA, they want you on their app. They want your details. They want to be able to communicate directly with you. And that's the value. And we think towns should feel the same way. So just in summary then, community engagement should use digital tools that are designed specifically for our community. They're within our control. That's the most important part. And, so basically like that article said, so that we're not decorating someone else's apartment. That's it. Hope it resonated, hope it makes sense. And yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, Barry, brilliant. And in terms of everything you say about social media or advertising platforms, as I think you've rightly pointed out, so much of that does make sense. I remember during the pandemic, I think it was Aberdeen Inspired started a campaign against Facebook because during lockdown, they had a number of businesses that wanted to communicate with users of the city centre about the trading restrictions, how it would impact them, how people could still use businesses in different ways. And all of the comms which went out via Facebook from those businesses to users, none of it was getting through. There was almost zero organic reach. And that was the first time I realized there was a real blockage there. And all the discussions that I think were had with Facebook were telling us that those businesses were being redirected to advertising. If you want your message to get out there, you're going to have to pay for it. Which during an emergency like the pandemic, a lot of people thought was below the belt. And that was a clear sign that there's an issue with social media. So it absolutely resonates. Absolutely resonates. It's really good to see Lakiva doing the work it's doing, because I think social media can be one of the most powerful forces for good we have in terms of community building. And at the moment, the way the mainstream platforms are being used, they're being used to do what I feel is almost the opposite in terms of create polarization and break communities rather than build them. So I think there's absolutely a role for some of the work you're doing. I think that's really fascinating. I'm going to ask you the question anyway, but I think I know what the answer is. I'm going to assume for the areas you're working in, a lot of the businesses have actually been really receptive in terms of getting involved in a digital town hub, and using it as a platform to be able to speak to others.
Yeah, so the experience is and hopefully people will associate with this a little bit. When we launch, we would generally split it into 40-40-20. So 40% of the businesses will react and say, this is great. Where has this been for the last 10 years? I really need something like this. Our town needs something like this. I'm on board straight away. The next 40% will say, okay, well, let's just see how this goes. They'll dip their toe in the water. They're not going to immediately jump on it because that's just their nature. They'll see, is this going to stick around? And then the last 20%, they might not be for them, and they might not be too technical. They might not have websites. They might not have Facebook pages. So in general, there's real positivity towards it. We've had experiences of having over 80% of businesses sign up, and that's been really positive. But we have to accept that every business is different. Every business has different motivations. Not everyone is too technical. So that's the limitations as well.
Yeah, really, really important, I think. And Lee, I want to come to you. I want to ask you about the work you're doing. So we're talking about connecting people digitally to their town, but I want to ask you about the work that's been done to connect people physically to Ipswich, because I understand that was a big part of the aspirations for Ipswich bid, was to think about that connectivity to and throughout the town and really ensure that people could it felt connected to like surrounding housing estates. And what progress have you made with that?
Yeah, so I think the quickest wins has been about those entrance routes where I picked up on Stoke Bridge, and actually it feeling like a place they want to come into, and designing that either through public art or regeneration of spaces. But it's also about understanding that, one of the benefits we have by being a large town, not a major city, is that it is pretty accessible from those locations. You just need to let people know what's happening in those locations, and that there actually is stuff for them that reflects what they want to see in their town. And I think it's been a transformation that's been about actually what are the interventions we can make that resonate, rather than start from the point of view of us knowing best, going and listening to them and actually understanding what the barriers are. I tried to touch on it in the presentation, actually are more deprived communities, which I felt was potentially going to be the ones that felt more excluded, or maybe do in more affluent places. They really felt the town centre was for them. So actually it's been about what are the differing type of interventions. And so for the more affluent areas that tend to look more towards the coast, it's about making their routes in better. For those that still use it as a practical centre, it's about putting more services in that they want to use. So it gets them off those places and in. So there's some work, it's pretty much public knowledge now, and I know a number of places are doing it, but the diagnostic scanning centre, for example, has come out of the hospital and is going into an old office unit in the town centre. Well, that brings with it jobs, but also it brings a pull factor to bring people in. And actually that's a circular, isn't it, on 100 years ago, where your high street had your butcher, your baker, your candlestick maker, all of that stuff. It's putting services back in, and it makes sense because all of our transport and infrastructure goes in and then out. So putting that back in has been another one of those key interventions. So I think making the routes in feel more appealing, that's been a quick delivery, but then reinvesting the services that had been hollowed out of the place as it became a principal retail street, investing them back in the heart of the town, again, giving people a core central place to come into.
And that you can't underestimate how important that is. So you watch some of the Vox Pops, seen them in May this year. We'll see them in May next year with various elections happening around the UK. And when you ask a lot of people about who they're voting for and why, a lot of what they will say, a lot of what it comes down to is what's happening on their high street. And the high street can often be almost a barometer of how good life is, how good the economy is. And if there's a lack of services and a lack of things they want to see, then that is what causes the unhappiness with the current political situation. It for me almost seems as clear as day when you see some of these vox pops on people when they are asked for their views. So I think to understand the work on both the connectivity to and from Ipswich, but also the critical services in the town itself, has got to be really important. And I can just see a world, here's the ideal world, both that work being done to repopulate some of those services, to reverse the hollowing out of a lot of towns we've seen over the years, plus social media platforms that look to actually build communities rather than divide them, and promote what's going on in town. Bring those two things together, and for me, that creates a completely different scenario in terms of how people feel about their place.
One of the other programs we run, OJ's, so I could split our audience, and I really enjoyed Barry's talk about with different audiences and where they engage as well. But I could split our audience into what I loosely call the Debenhams man and Woolworths woman, for ease of alliteration, and those people that want a high street back that we actually have to give an uncomfortable message to, which is they're not coming back, and 100,000 square foot shop selling pick and mix probably wasn't a good idea in the first place. But actually, when we look at our young audience, and we built a program called Wolsey 550, which started off as a historic program telling the story of Thomas Wolsey, but actually turned into this story of how a working class boy from Ipswich rose to the very seat of power under Henry VIII. And we've built programs that disrupt the cycle that young people can get into from maybe their parents or other generations that tells them their town's rubbish and does the negative stereotypes. We go into schools, we build them basically small versions of work experience, but where they come in and they do a service with a business. But part of that whole thing is about saying, look, this town is for you, And actually, the things you want in your town aren't the return of Debenhams and Woolworths. And so we will start. I think that work, whilst not traditionally something a bid does, is absolutely fundamental, because we're essentially building an audience for 10 years' time that has pride in the town again.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think, Barry, this is a question for you. Do you think younger consumers, users of town centres, might be very different in terms of the way they engage in town centres because of their exposure to social media growing up, where for a lot of us, social media is still a new thing. It's like a bolt onto our lives. For a lot of the generation below us, they've grown up with it, lived with it. And I just wonder if that changes the nature of their engagement with place as a result.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously, that's where they are. I read a very interesting article talking about how the reason young people are on social media is because essentially it's where their parents are not. So young people crave independence, and chances are they don't get the freedom to go down to the town centre and hang out anymore, because we're all helicopter parents, and so the one place they can go to where their parents are not is social media. And that's kind of one of the major, which never kind of clicked for me until I read that, and I said, yeah, well, that's where they have their little piece of independence. So look, I mean, there's no pulling back from it. There's no changing to it. This is, young people engage with technology a lot more than the older people. This is what they're going to respond to. These are the platforms they're using. So, we can't ignore that. We have to accept that this is the future. This is where they're going to find events. This is where they're going to find, businesses that they're interested in. This is where they're going to, be encouraged to use the town center. They're not just going to wander down like we would have 25 years ago.
Yeah, and do you think do you think the digital town hubs you're building, there's going to be enough there for younger people to really get involved and to see that as a platform they can use as well?
Well, look, that's the idea. Yeah, I mean, if it's so, our principle is that we have to engage everyone, no matter what you're interested in. So if you're interested in events, there's something for you. If you're interested in discounts, there's something for you. There's lots of tours and trails for like Halloween and for Christmas, to try and get young people in. There's competitions, there's news feeds, there's surveys. So, what we're trying to do is find whatever that point of interest is, that point of connection is for a person, whether it's these 65 or 15. We're trying to get them so that then we can talk to them, and we can sort of encourage them. So, and everyone has a different, trigger. Everyone has a different hook. So we have to make sure we cover the full range of things that people might be interested in, and then we can send them messages about stuff that's going to encourage them to visit the town centre. So whatever that happens to be. So statistically, our key, the biggest user of the technology is between 25 and 45. That usually covers about 55% of the users, 25 to 45. But we'd have a good cohort of under that, and up to 55 is where it starts to sort of tail off a little bit. So that's, just anecdotally.
That's really interesting. And another question for you, actually. I understand you were just with IDA over in Washington, DC,
Hmm.
for their annual conference. Was there a lot of talk over there around challenges in terms of community polarization and community building, given some of the challenges they're having across the pond, which feels a little bit similar to what we're experiencing here, even though we might be much further behind where they are? Were there similar conversations happening?
Yeah, yeah. So their equivalent of flags on lampposts is probably the military guard being sent in. So I was in Washington, and of course the military guard are hanging around the lovely, peaceful town center, which there's not a piece of grass out of place, and you see all these soldiers. So you get a lot of the town center managers would be, it's had a huge impact. The changes have had a huge impact on their footfall and on their ability to be able to act. So there's a lot less tourism in their towns. There's a lot of the projects that they were halfway through have been put on pause because they don't know if the federal funding is going to come. So they're dealing with all of those issues. They're not a million miles away from what's happening over this side of the water. But the big focus, there was a huge amount of focus on AI. Believe it or not, in Washington, a lot of them were talking about AI, how to use it, how to adapt to it, what's coming, what it's going to look like 5 years in the future. That was a huge topic, and how towns are going to adapt to that as well.
Yeah, brill. And it's final opportunity for anybody to ask any questions as well, whether it's Pride in Place, whether it's the work of BIDS or local authorities on community building, or whether it's social media as well. So anything really to discuss. Lee, to bring you back in, I think just to say, do you think it's one of Ipswich's benefits that two assets which you've clearly used really well, which are almost unique to Ipswich? I know there are some areas similar, but the fact that you have a local pop star who is, let's face it, global. I think Ed Sheeran even impacted one of our purple flag assessments over in New Zealand. That's how big he was. They were specific about the day they wanted their purple flag assessment because Ed Sheeran happened to be in Auckland at the time. That's how big he is. And then also being a one football club town as well, and using both of those facets to your benefit. Sounds like a good strategy to me.
I think they're yeah, what do I think? I think it's about seizing the moment, really, with them. I mean, there's some uniqueness with the Ed Sheeran thing, right? Because it's him coming home. So I think the club will look to put more of those events on, and we'll have some learnings from it. But it'll be hard to find such a compelling, the international inbound tourism we got from that was more about his fans wanting to see his hometown. So we met a number of them that had come to go to all 3 nights of the gig and had come 2 days early to go and see the castle on the hill. So it's just utilizing those moments. I guess the one club thing is actually a really interesting sort of gift and a curse, because for an awful number of years the club didn't engage with the town. It sat very separately, and actually it's been about them coming to the table and wanting to be more than just a football club that happens to be in Ipswich. And for years, old boards had looked at whether they could move it out and sit it on a motorway. And actually, the current leadership is very clear that the club is a community club and has to play that role. And we want to step up alongside that, because actually their reach and clout and audience is something we could only dream of. Then Ed Sheeran's on a different level to that. We've got Abby, who does our social media. It's her first year in a proper job, and she's been able to collaborate on campaigns going across the globe. So it's building it in an authentic way, isn't it? And actually, I think the other really good example of a place that did this really well was Leicester, actually, because I think it went from Richard I to winning the Premier League to, there was a Kasabian gig, which I'm not going to suggest is the same as it, but it's that, like, there's an element of the luck comes because you get the moments, but it's then capitalizing on the fortune of having those moments and making the most of them.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Really good point. Especially the Leicester point. I remember the surrealness of having a meeting on car parking, which overlooked the car park in which they dug up Richard I. So that was quite surreal. Lee, Barry, really, really fascinating. Thank you both very much for your contributions. I think we will be in touch on different aspects of what you've talked about today, because I think it's all really fascinating and so much more to get into the details of. For everyone else, lots of events coming up. So there'll be a few roundtables happening across the country between now and the end of the year. We got the Place Management Conference looking at multi-agency approach happening on the 26th of February in Central London next year. And we'll also be having discussions around community, both polarization and also how we build communities to support town centres as well. So everyone, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. I'm calling it my word of the year. Enshittification is absolutely genius. So I'll leave you all with that. Speak to you all soon.